Thank you very much for that introduction and the chance to come out and talk to everybody tonight. Okay. Yep, can everybody hear me okay? I apologize, I'm a little stuffy. This up and down weather we've been having has not been kind to my sinuses, so we'll get through this. So I'm going to talk to you about photographing the landscapes of Kansas, and a lot of people would find this a very funny thing to talk about, right? Because we all know there's nothing in Kansas to photograph but one big wheat field, right? And so we could probably stop right here and say, this is what you photograph in Kansas, according to a lot of people. And we've all probably heard too many times that Kansas is as flat as a pancake. And this is the only thing you see in Kansas, especially as you drive across I-70. People say, you know, what is there in Kansas to photograph? So the end, and I'll be happy to take questions. Fortunately, there's more to Kansas than people think. And the map up here on the screen shows Kansas divided up into several different physiographic regions. And each of these regions is unique. It has unique geology, unique geological history, and that, of course, then influences the soil and the vegetation, and then ultimately, from the photography standpoint, how these regions look. So there's a lot more diversity in the state in terms of our landscapes and what there is to photograph than I think most of the people in the country would probably recognize. And what I'm gonna do, and for the rest of the talk, is show some photos from, I think, 6 different regions of the state and kind of highlight how these regions look and kind of hopefully to inspire people to get out and explore the state. If you're not familiar with how some of these different regions look, to give you an idea of what's out there in the state. And a few years ago, well, last year, I guess, I was fortunate to be part of this book, Kansas Landscapes, a photographic tour of the region's geological history by Keith Miller. And Keith is a retired geology professor from Kansas State. And what Keith does in this book is go through each of those physiographic regions and discusses the geological history of it and its features and things like that. And then there's photos from these different regions of mine, Mark Clarke and Mickey Shannon. If you're not familiar with Mark Clarke and Mickey Shannon's work, definitely look them up. There are some amazing photographers. This book was a long time in the making. About, I think, 15 years or so ago, Keith and I did a class at a retirement community in Manhattan where Keith would talk about some of these regions and I would show photos from them. And Keith asked me after that class if I would be interested in doing a book. I said, yeah. We met a few times to talk about it, and Keith ended up leaving the state, and we kind of lost touch, and that was that. About 3 years ago, Keith reached out to me, and he had retired, and was curious if I was still interested in pursuing this book. And so from that, this book developed. And this was great for me because I don't know anything about geology. I'm going to mention a few things about geology, but don't quote me on those because I'm trying to remember them from the book. But for me, you know, I'm going to talk about this as we go through some of this. You know, I'm looking at light, I'm looking at patterns, I'm looking at texture, I'm looking at things like that when I photograph landscapes. But I never thought about the forces that cause the landscapes to look the way they look. And it's really fascinating to me to read through this book is this concept of geological deep time and the immense time cycles that have been shaping these landscapes millions and millions of years, and they're still being shaped. And it's pretty, I mean, it's not going to matter to me, right? But in 100,000 years or 500,000 years, these landscapes that I'm photographing are gone, right? Totally going to be different. I'm going to be long gone. So, like I said, not going to matter to me. But that's an interesting thing for me to think about, especially when I'm caught up in the moment trying to photograph light that's maybe going to last 30 seconds or something like that. I'm photographing that over a landscape that's been shaped over millions of years. So it's kind of helping me in some ways connect with the landscapes more and slow down a little bit. You know, maybe the next 30 seconds doesn't really matter that much when I'm looking at a landscape that's 100 million years old. So the first place I'd like to start is the Osage Cuestas, and this region is circled here down in the southeast corner of the state. And the Cuestas are characterized by rock formations that have a slope to them. And so in Kansas, they slope back to the west, and on the east, they have kind of an abrupt cliff. And Keith goes through the book and kind of talks a little bit about why that is. But one of the best places to see these rock formations is Echo Park. This is west of Topeka in Wabunsee County, and you can see the rock formations here. A little bit of slope to them, so it's be on the west side, dropping off on the east there. So really, really pretty little park. I haven't been there in a while. I need to get back here. Every time I visited, it's been a really peaceful place to visit. One thing that's interesting about this region of Kansas, though, are the waterfalls that are there. And this is, a lot of people don't think about waterfalls when you think about Kansas, right? And this is one from the Eureka City Lake, just outside of Eureka. And one thing again that I learned from Keith was how interesting it is where water has been eroding things, that reveals the rocks and the underlying geology. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit later. This is a great part of the state, go down and wander through waterfalls. Of course, a lot of our waterfalls, I think almost all of them are going to depend on seasonal precipitation, right? So the best time to go out and see them would be spring. Hopefully we have a good wet spring this year, early summer, or in the winter when we get really crazy snows like we've had the last couple of years if you can get out. So this is another one at Elk Falls, just outside of Elk Falls, Kansas. There's an old bridge that I'm standing on that you can walk across. You can circle down around and get down to the waterfalls. Really, really beautiful area in there. Probably one of my favorite waterfalls to visit in Kansas, especially in the fall when you start to get some color in the trees up there. And this is Butcher Falls down in Sedan, Kansas. This was at a time when Kansas had really got hammered by some rains, and I went with a friend and we went through several waterfalls in one trip. It was a lot of fun. But again, you can see the exposed rocks here from all the water that's eroded down through there. If you go down to this part of the state, there's several waterfalls down here, but make sure you go into Sedan and visit the Hollow, which is a little park in Sedan. It's gorgeous. Really well done. There's an interesting wooden kind of ramp that walks you down around into this little area where you have a waterfall running out there. Really peaceful area. And again, you can see the layers of rocks revealed here. So now we're going to move a little bit up to the northeast corner of the state. And this is an area I've heard of before, the glaciated region. But I didn't really know its history at all. It's really pretty fascinating. Twice in the last ice age, ice sheets made it down into Kansas. And the second period, the first time I believe it was just barely into the northeast corner of the state. But the second time, about 700,000 years ago, if I remember right, you can see the boundary here where the ice made it down. And in places, they estimate the ice was over 500 feet thick. So it's pretty cool to drive up into this region and think about you might be standing under 500 feet of ice. And we're going to look at some photos here from Potawatomi County. And the interesting thing to see from this glaciated region are these rocks. These are called glacier erratics, and they're in quartzite, they Sioux quartzite, if I remember right. These are rocks that were carried down from farther north when that ice came down. The ice would act like a big bulldozer and scrape everything and bring it with it. And then of course, when the ice melted, these rocks were left. So these rocks come from Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa, and they're formed from sandstone that's over 1 billion years old, which I didn't realize till I worked with heat pumps either. So that's really pretty amazing. I'm in the Flint Hills now, so I see a pretty big rock. It's pretty easy to go pick up. Those are really light rocks. These are not. I don't know if anybody's had any experience with these. These are incredibly dense rocks. And you think, oh, I can pick that up. And you better pick a small one. So it's pretty interesting to drive around this part of the state. And probably one of the best times to see these rocks are in the spring, either when the vegetation's been burned or it's short, or I guess in dry years. You can see a lot of these rocks along stream beds where, again, soil's been eroded and or the rocks have been carried in by the water. And here's a little on the side of the road in the ditch where the water had been running. You can see a whole lot of these rocks laying down in there. There's places where I would stop to take some pictures, and the roads have been recently bladed. And you can see, like on the hill where they scraped the road, there's just a bed of these rocks up there. So it's really fascinating when you look at this. You can see some, but I'm really curious what's down the 2 feet, 5 feet that's left from these glaciers. And some of these are large, this is a 4-strand barbed wire fence. I would hate to think what that weighed and how much of it you can't see. There's pictures of much, much larger rocks than these. And if you go to Blue Rapids, they have a town square circle. And inside there, they have some rocks that they brought in. They have some information about this era and these rocks being brought in. It's pretty, there's some really large ones in there. I know there's a town somewhere in that part of the state that has one right in the middle of one of their roads. And it's so large, they just left it so you just drive around it. Side but it's really cool to wander around this part of the state and look for these rocks. And a good place to go visit a few of them is the Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie south of Wamego. This is a park, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful park. It's managed for wildflowers. And so it's really a rich area for wildflowers. It's supposedly got some pretty rare wildflowers. There's several hiking trails. Just recently it's been expanded and there's some of these rocks along the trails. If you get up to the summit up here, there's one on the other side of this hill that's a marker. And this prairie has some interesting history. The Mitchells, because there's a connection to the Underground Railroad here with this prairie and this property. And there's a couple, again, kiosks there that explain some of that history if you go visit that. So if you're in the area and you want to see some of these rocks, you want a beautiful place to get out and wander around, that's a really good place to go stop and visit. And try to pick up that rock. This one's probably maybe that high, not that big. I don't know how much of it's under the ground. I have a few of these in my yard. People have helped me bring in, and the front yard and the back of the pickup, they put it as a loader, and they were pushed out, and that's where they stay. Where they landed, it's good to me. So now we're going to go out to western Kansas in the Smoky Hills, and we're going to sneak in a few pictures from the High Plains area. The Smoky Hills is a big area, but where we're going to go out, where a lot of people are probably most familiar seeing photos here, is on the southern edge of Goat County. And then we're going to sneak over here into Scott County in the High Plains. And I spent quite a bit of time in this part of the state photographing, and I was born in Scott City. So I was born in Scott City in Scott County, in the Scott County Hospital, and my parents swore that that's not why my name was Scott. They never did tell me why I got named Scott. My middle name is Roger. That was my dad's name, so after him. But supposedly when I was born, the doctor said they should have named me Oliver so I could be their little SOB. So this is probably one of the most seen or maybe photographed areas out here. This is Monument Rocks. And this area is on private property, but it's open to the public. The owners do have some signs up there with some rules they'd like you to observe. It's a really fascinating area. And these formations were deposited when Kansas was underwater. So at one point in time, there was a large inland sea that cut what is North America in half. And this is sediment basically from those seas that have formed these chopped pyramids. These are, if I remember right, 25 to like 130 million years old. So it's really fascinating to get out here and wander around these rock formations. This is a picture of my dad set up to photograph what people call the keyhole arch there. My dad shared a love of photography with me, and so we would take photo trips around the state. And because of the family history out here, we would go back here quite a bit and photograph these rock formations. Like I said, you can get out and wander around these formations. You can see all the layers here through there, which are tell you about the geological history. And it's pretty fascinating, this region. This inland sea would flood, and then we would have an ice age, and the ice would pull all that water out and it would dry out. And then we would go where the ice melted and it would all come back. And so Kansas was repeatedly flooded and dried. Well, big swath of North America was actually during this period. Down the road from that sort of main formation that everybody calls Monument Rocks, there's other formations there that you can get out and wander around. And I don't, I'm spent most of my time now, most of my life in Manhattan in the Flint Hills. So I'm used to seeing the tall grass prairie. So out here, it's pretty interesting. Depending on which map you look on, this is either on the western edge of the mixed prairie or the eastern edge of the short grass prairie. Much different vegetation than what it's used to, say, the tall grass prairie around Manhattan. If you never get out there when there's some wildflower blooms, though, it's very, very pretty out there. And when you're out there, keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see. My wife and I were out there one evening, and noticed something moving, and it was a tarantula that was moving through the area. I don't know where it was going. It was on a mission to go somewhere. It was kind of fun to see that. This was photographed with the biggest telephoto lens I had, and it is cropped. So I do not want, I've seen tarantulas twice in Kansas now.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Only the males come out when they're hunting for females.
Really?
That's the only time you'll see it.
So he was
There's only one time in the year they do
Yeah, this one was definitely going somewhere.
that. Yeah.
Nothing was gonna get in its way. So keep your eyes out, kind of an interesting thing to see out in the middle of Western Kansas. So I grew up, like I said, out there, I think till I was like 8 or 9. And my dad was a co-op manager, and so he knew a lot of landowners in the area. And so he would get permission for us to go back in areas where the soil was eroded down in some of these formations, much, much smaller than what you could see Castle Rock. And we would hunt for shark's teeth. So I brought some of these in. This was a big deal in my family's history. And if you'd like to come up and look at these after the talk, feel free. It's pretty amazing to hold a fossilized shark's tooth that you found in the middle of the US that's 25 to 130 million years old. Some of these you can see serrations on the edge of them. They're still sharp enough that you could cut your fingernail if you wanted to. So this was a big deal for a young kid. It was kind of boring, but then immensely exciting. And you wander around and you look and you look and you look and you look and then why am I here, mom and dad? And so you take your bow and arrow and you goof off. Then you find one. And that was so thrilling, especially if you found one before your parents or your sisters found it. First person to find one is a big deal. And my mom was a fanatic about these. I have the collection now. My parents have passed. But that was like our family's most guarded treasure with shark's teeth. So we're gonna go a little bit farther east down there in Joe County, and this is Castle Rock. Again, this area is on private property, but if the landowners leave it open to the public. Been up there sometimes on the roads, so I wasn't sure I was gonna get there or get out, but it is open. If you look, I think the oldest photo I've seen of this online is from the late 1800s. And there was a lot more to this, with maybe a little more castle-like that have collapsed. And again, this is an area that's connected to my family history. This is where my mom and dad went on their first date. So they met when they were in school at Fort Hays. And my mom grew up in Healy, Kansas, which was out in this general area, and was familiar with it. So they went back there for one of their first dates. So this is the Castle Rock Formation. It's pretty, but to get to that, you drive by a cliff, kind of a hillside that's been eroded. So you come in on this hill and you wrap around like that in Castle Rock. That Castle Rock Formation is out over here. But where this hillside's been eroded is just beautiful. Lots of great formations that you can photograph. This is kind of standing up still on that hill. This is down in those formations, walking around there. And this is an area, again, where you think about time, this is really cool, but these are constantly collapsing, right? Just like the Castle Rock has collapsed to that keyhole arch I showed the photo of my dad photographing. It's getting wider. You can see if you look in photos through time, it's widening. Eventually it's going to collapse. But it's pretty fascinating to get out here and wander around. This was one morning I was in this area with a good friend of mine, Wayne Rodas, when we were out here photographing. And this is a photo of Wayne standing there set up. And I kind of like that to show the scale here. So these are not small rock formations at all. And on that same trip, again, this is Wayne set up. We were out there in an evening, storm clouds moving in. It's very quiet. long ways from anywhere here. And we heard this really strange sound kind of off in the distance, and I didn't know what it was, but Wayne recognized it. And this was in March, late March. This was a flock of sandhill cranes flying up to Nebraska. They were too far away for us to photograph, they were way out there, but you could hear a pretty big group. And later Wayne made the comment, what an amazing experience this was to be standing on rocks that are millions of years old, the bottom of an ocean, and you hear these birds fly this migratory route that they've been doing for who knows how many thousands of years, right? And that was a pretty cool moment to be out there for this. But you can also see these rock formations pretty much just from driving the sides of the road. So driving the roads, this is a view not far from Castle Rock, just out in somebody's pasture. Now there's an area north of Healy called Hell's Bar. I think some people call it also Hell's Half Acre maybe. You can actually see this on Google Maps. It's a huge eroded area. I've been able to get out there on that once. It was pretty cool to see. Just standing there, you can see rock formations like Castle Rock, not near that big, but just dotted everywhere out in pastures. Kansas's newest state park, Little Jerusalem, is out here now. I have not yet been there, but there's hiking trails around that park. And that's high on my list of places to go visit to see some of these formations. But if you're in this area, we're going to sneak over to Scott County to see a little bit of the high plains. So this is north of the Scott County Lake. And I definitely recommend if you're out there to visit the Scott County Lake. Beautiful, beautiful lake. It's got a great trail that runs around the lake, 5 miles maybe or something like that. Gorgeous lake. This is on the north end of the lake, looking out across the prairie here. And my dad, I love John Wayne Westerns, so I grew up seeing every John Wayne Western numerous times. And I don't know why, but this has always reminded me of a scene you might see from one of those Westerns. You kind of picture John Wayne come riding across the prairie. Another spot to go visit if you're in this area is Battle Canyon. And this is also near Scott County Lake. And this is the site of the last battle between Native Americans and the U.S. Cavalry in Kansas. Again, it's on private property, but it's open to the public. You can drive in. There's a little kiosk there set up that has some information about the battle and the history of that. It's a pretty interesting place to wander around. Last time I was there has been several years, but during the course of this battle, I think it lasted a couple days. The Native Americans had dug some rifle pits around the rim of the canyon, and they're filled in now, but some of them you can still see the circles where they had lined them with rock there. It's a pretty interesting place to go out. It's quiet and kind of almost feel the history there. If that makes sense. And again, it's a very dry year, very different sort of prairie than what we would see where I'm familiar in Auburn. Another great place to visit the Smoky Hills is Kannapolis Lake. Kannapolis Lake here in Ellsworth County. The nice thing about this is the hiking trails. Lots and lots of hiking trails where you can get out in the rock formations and really experience. That's one thing that's a little bit maybe frustrating photographing Kansas. It's neither a good nor bad thing. It just is. Most of the property in the state is privately owned, right? 96%. Most of the ag states are the same way. So almost all of my photography is done from roads. So it's nice when you can find a place you can get out and wander around in there. And this is a view from one of the trails, I think Buffalo Tracks Canyon. Walk down through the trail here, you get up in these rock formations. These are red tinted from the iron that's there. This is another section called Red Rock Trail. And you'll notice these photos are from the winter and the fall. And I like to go there when the leaves are gone, because you can see all the trees in these canyons. I've been there in the summer when the trees are leafed out and the vegetation along the trail is over your head. You can't really see the rock formations as well, I don't think. And I'm not a fan of hot weather. There are rattlesnakes in this area. I'm gonna forget which ones, timber rattlers, I think, that they think were transplanted there. Because they shouldn't be there, but there's a small population that has survived. I've never seen them. I don't think they've ever caused any trouble, but they're there. So I kind of go in the fall or winter. It's it's prettier anyway, I think. Um, This is
Oh, wow.
just a different view. This is kind of walking down through the canyons there one spring early. I tend to almost maybe to a fault shoot great big wide open landscapes. And so I need to train myself to look for smaller intimate scenes, but I just really like this plum brush. It was blooming here contrasting with the rocks. It's got a really good view of the rocks there, the sandstone. But this particular year, I've always wanted to go back in the spring and I've never made it, but there's a point where the trail goes up over a little hill and you kind of dip down into an opening. And I was there with a few friends and we were going up that hill. This is all really sandy soil, so it's not always the easiest walking. And we could hear this sound and we weren't sure what it was, kind of this low buzz. And we came up over this little crest of this hill, and the valley in front was just full of these plum bushes, just completely full. And that sound was bees, just alive with bees. And you could just hear it. And before we even saw it, and the smell was incredible. That many of these plum thickets blooming all at the same time. I don't know how often that happens, that you get such a good bloom. Maybe it was very rare. We were really, really lucky. I really want to get back and see if I can experience that. And again, keep your eyes open. You don't know what you might see. It's an interesting lizard we saw out there one trip, and then in that Red Rock Canyon, when we were hiking, I sat down to take a break and almost sat on this little scorpion, little tiny thing in the middle of this one. That was really cool to see out. And again, if you're in this area, make sure you stop at Mushroom Rock State Park, which is, if you're going to Canopolis Lake, you're gonna drive by this park. It's a pretty small park. I don't know, there's not very many of these formations, but you gotta find these concretions. And in the book, he talks about why these are here and how the waters react with these minerals in these rocks and sort of cement them together so they're more resistant to erosion. So everything else has been eroded out and left these. Again, eventually these are going to collapse. You can see some of them falling down. I think there's, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these maybe up in the park that you can earn. Again, really small area, but it's really interesting. Another kind of in this part of the state near Minneapolis is Rock City, which is a really cool park. You can go out and see. You can get out, you can climb on the rocks, and it's all these sort of brown things sitting on the ground. Some of them are huge, huge, huge rocks, and that's really a neat area you can see. So now we're going to switch gears and head south. This is another area that's connected to my family history. So this is the red, or some people call it the gyp or the gypsum hills. The first place we're going to go down here is around Barber County and Comanche County. And this is another area that my dad and I spent a lot of time together photographing. The Bean family first homesteaded in Kansas, right here on the edge of Comanche County in the late 1800s. And so we don't know a ton about our family history, but we know that the Beans came from Illinois, at some point moved to Texas, and I think the Panhandle, and then for some reason, Charles and Nancy Bean had to leave Texas. Family history says like in the middle of the night. Why? Maybe we don't want to know why. But they left Texas in a hurry and came up and stopped right outside of Coldwater, what's now Coldwater, there in the late 1800s. And so on one of the trips, this is a pretty special picture for me. It's a photo of my dad, and he's photographing an old house that's here collapsing. You can still see this. This is the highway that runs between Coldwater and Medicine Lodge. And that house was built by Charles and Nancy Bean. And so when they first settled in Comanche County, so the house was here, and back over here, there was a hill and a draw. And again, family history says that they first lived in a dugout on the side of that hill and started their farm. And then one thing they would do is make bread and trade it with the Native Americans moving through. And then as they got established and got enough money, they were able to build that house there. And then eventually, forgive my ancestors now. I think Pearl Bean built a house out west of Coldwell, after my dad grew up. So there was a being living in Comanche County from the late 1800s until like 1998 when my grandma, Arnett Bean, passed away. So it was always pretty special for Dad and I going back down here and photograph this part of the state. So this is a view on a scenic drive that you can take out of Medicine Lodge and head south down to almost the Oklahoma border. This was one morning Dad and I had gotten up and we had this absolutely beautiful sunrise that kind of matched the color of the soil. And again, got red in the soil there because of the iron in the soil. And I think if you showed a lot of people this picture and asked them where was this, nobody's going to guess Kansas. Right? One thing I wish that I had, you see all the cedar trees, which, you know, we have a lot of problems in the Flint Hills with the cedar trees coming in. My dad had been into photography when he was in high school, and he shot a lot of movies, and I have a bunch of his 8mm movies still, but I don't have a lot of his prints that he shot. And I know he's got photos from this region, and I would love to see those probably from the early 1950s and compare the trees then till now. So that's one thing he always talked about when we would come back here was the darn trees, covering everything. He hated trees. When he grew up, you know, when he grew up there wasn't the trees. When we were out taking pictures, if he would see a pile of dead trees, he would want to stop and take pictures of them. He was really happy to see you land up to it. Just down from there, another view kind of showing the red hills here one evening on the same drive. And then, you know, this is something that you can see in a lot of places where there's been some erosion. You can see that red color in the soil. And again, you can see the layers through there, which relate to the geological history and when different climate patterns were going on in these different regions. And this is down almost on the Oklahoma border. Again, I don't think many people would guess that this is in Kansas. And this is a view from the highway, which is a scenic highway between Coldwater and Medicine Lodge. There is a pull-off, a couple pull-offs you can stop and look at the red hills. But you can pull off most of the places to get out and take pictures. And if you just wander around anywhere in these regions, you can see these rock formations out there in the prairie. A beautiful, beautiful part of the state, I think. And if you're there, make sure you go see Big Basin and Little Basin. And we're going to jump over here now to the north side of Clarke County. And Big Basin is essentially, if I understand it, a big sinkhole. 1,600 acres, I think, if I remember right. And this area, a lot of water had run through and caused these, there's a lot of caves in this part of the state, actually. And caused this large sinkhole to form. A little weird to think you're driving out into a big sinkhole. This is a public property. The Department of Wildlife and Parks operates this, so you can drive into it. This is a view just kind of driving into the park there. Beautiful area again. This is one spot. Dad and I were out taking pictures, and we stopped and we're photographing. Beautiful day with some great light. Really showed off the texture and the topography of the place. And there's a little monument up here on the hill. I was out here once and somebody had gotten a full-sized RV up there, which would have been challenging, I think. But the thing that I will always remember about this picture, though, is the silence. So there's one highway that runs by this place, and it's not busy at all. And on this particular day, there was no birds, very little wind, no planes happened to be flying over, just absolute dead silence. Probably the most profound silence I have ever experienced in my life. When my dad and I got out of the vehicle, we just automatically started whispering. It was so quiet, we didn't even realize we were doing it. It just felt like we should whisper. And that's something that I really want to get back here just to experience that silence. It's a beautiful area and it's fun to wander around. But that was just, we don't get that kind of silence, I think, much anymore. And this is an area inside Big Basin called Little Basin. And Little Basin, there's a parking lot right here, and this trail runs down to Little Basin. So I can tell a story since we have someone here that can hear the story. This is your dad? So first time I visited this place was a stormy day. See, this parking lot, your highest place around, right? So it's just more of a dip down in here than you think. And so it was lightning. I've never been here before, and I told my dad, I want to take a picture of this trail going down in there. And I don't think you should get out in this lightning. But you know, right? So I got out, set my tripod up, with one picture, boom, lightning hit closest to me than I've ever experienced in my life. Jumped about 20 feet in the air, grabbed my gear, ran back in the pickup, sat down. Dad had a huge smile. The moral of that story is always listen to your dad. Thanks, not me. But what's really cool about this is in Little Basin, you can walk down here. This area is called St. Jacob's Well. And St. Jacob's Well is a natural spring that's never been known to go dry. There's all sorts of legends that this goes, you know, it's infinitely deep and connected way down into earth. None of that's true. They've sent stuff down. It's about 70 feet deep, if I remember right, cone shaped. But they do think it's correct that it's probably never been dry. So there's Native Americans would have used this for a water source. I think probably prehistoric humans visited this for a water source. So it's pretty interesting to go down there and stand at the edge of this and think humans may have been coming down here for 10,000 or more years. When I was there, there was a lot of poison ivy around it. So maybe humans have been getting poison ivy there for about 10,000 years. Definitely worth going to see if you're in. And so now we're going to jump back up to the Flint Hills, which is where I live now, where I've done most of my photography. And the Flint Hills is a really fascinating and important area. And I like this map. So this light green is the area of what the tall grass prairie used to be. And the dark green is the Flint Hills, which is pretty much what's left, at least in one big piece. So only about 4% of the tall grass prairie is left, and that's in the Flint Hills. And if you'd like to read a book that's got pretty good history of some of the forces that caused this, Sea of Grass is a fantastic book. I am just about finished with it, and I am very embarrassed about the history that I did not know about agriculture and some of our history there. Just was never exposed to it, I guess. But it's really fascinating to read about all the forces that kind of went in to this change. And so in Kansas, the Flint Hills runs from Cali County up to about Riley. And as I said, I've lived in this area now since 1988, so the longest I've lived anywhere in Kansas. So this is home to me. And it's kind of a special area for me from a photography standpoint because the Flint Hills is where I got started in photography. So there's the Konza Prairie. If you're not familiar with that, that's a large research prairie that's owned by the Nature Conservancy and run by Kansas State University, about 10,000 acres, if I remember right outside of Manhattan. And they have public hiking trails. Great place to see the Flint Hills. If you go there, please stay on the trails and don't take your dogs or your horses.
Yes, thank you.
It is an active research prairie. It's not Florida, but it is a gorgeous, gorgeous area. And when I was in grad school in Kansas State, I was spending too much time inside working, and I really missed being outside. You know, I grew up hunting and fishing. These are some photos of me from just a couple of years ago. My family, every year, we would take camping trips to Lake Wilson in the spring, or sorry, the start of summer, and then we would go to the mountains at the end of summer, and we would fish. My dad was really into hunting, so we did a lot of quail hunting, pheasant hunting, deer hunting, so I spent a lot of time outside. So when I was in grad school, I really wanted to get back out, and I think everybody here, I can say this now, remember, there was a time before the internet. It wasn't so easy just to find all the public hunting ground and things like that. So I wasn't sure, what can I do to get outside? And well, I'll pick up a camera and I'll hunt with the camera. And I worked at Konza Prairie, and so I was familiar with it. I knew about the trails. I knew there was a lot of deer out there. And so my first attempts into getting into photography were wildlife photography. And so this is one of the earliest photos I could find. This is probably from 1995. Shot on film. And this is what I would do. I would get my camera and I would go walk the trails and photograph the deer. And at that time, Colton had a huge deer population. It got to be a little bit of a problem, if I remember right. But sometimes you could see over 200 deer on the trails, and they saw people all the time, right? So, you know, you walk down the trail, they walk by, hi, how are you? You know, so it wasn't too difficult to photograph. So that's how I got started in photography, was just wandering around looking for photos of deer. But pretty soon I found out it was a little challenging to get close-up photos of deer. Now I really like this photo. I like the photos of the wildlife in their environment. But at the time, I was really focused on that close shot, probably because I grew up hunting. I wanted the trophy photo, right? So I got a little frustrated. Big telephoto lenses were out of my reach financially as a grad student. So I kind of switched gears and started photographing the trail and the landscape there. And that's kind of how I shifted into landscape photography and photographing the views off the side of the trail there. And being out on Conda, this was one of my first digital photos, early 2000s. This is where I kind of started to learn about light and how light can make the landscape look, and why, you know, landscape photographers talk about golden light, that hour around sunrise and that hour around sunset, and the light's coming in low across the horizon and casts long, soft shadows. That is what reveals the shapes and textures of the landscapes. The light also switches to more warm tones, which is more pleasing to the eye usually. And so this is kind of where I really got hooked on landscape photography. And that morphed into trips with my dad around the state, but also me wandering through the Flint Hills as often as I can. So we'll take a little bit of a tour up to the Flint Hills. This is down in Cali County. I haven't spent a lot of time down the very southern edge of the Flint Hills. I like this photo because it's got the lone tree. I can't pass up a lone tree at all. A joke, I don't know why you never want to do this, but if you needed to track landscape photographers, find an open stretch of prairie and plant a tree out there, and you get every landscape photographer to come by and stop. I don't know what that is, catnip, I guess. But I just love that big, expansive feeling of the prairie, and that's what I kind of try to get across.
Attention library teacher, it's 7:45 and we'll be closing in 15 minutes. Please finalize your.
Sorry, one second.
Thank you.
And that, sorry, that doesn't apply to us. We can go past it. So they'll make a couple more announcements, but don't worry. All right.
This is a view from Texaco Hill. Go a little bit farther up and from the south end. If you want to just get this expansive feeling of the Flint Hills, I think this is the place to go to. You can find this on Google Maps. It's marked. It's southeast of Matfield Green, if I remember right. But you wind up on this hill. It's incredible, incredible views. And again, to me, this is just what I feel comfortable in. I was born and raised in Kansas. When I came to school at K-State, my parents lived in Kinsley, Kansas at the time, in the central part of the state. When I would drive home, I'd get about to Great Bend maybe, and I could just feel this weight come off me. I was a little claustrophobic then, even in the Flint Hills. And I'd get back out there and think, I can see it, and nobody can sneak up on me. And this is where you can really see that. Another great place to go visit is Teeter Rock. Was out there one morning again, my friend Wayne, when the sunrise was coming up, strike get between his rocks. This is again on private property, but the landowner graciously leaves it open to the public. And this is pretty interesting. These rocks, there was a pile of rocks here originally put up by James Teeter, named to guide settlers to the Cottonwood River. And once you know this is here, you can see this from a long ways away. It's up on the high hills. Once you know, okay, that's there, you can really see this from a long ways away. There was a little oil boom, and the town of Teeterville was put up near here, and you can see some of the ruins of Teeterville, and the rocks then were taken and used in that town. So no, then it was James Teeter in the 50s put this back up as a monument to those original ones. So you can still go out there, and you are up high on a hill. You can see a long ways out there. So it's got some fantastic views of the Flint Hills. And if you're there, something that's interesting to see is there's herds of wild or feral mustangs, depending on what you want to call them, that are there, a program from the Bureau of Land Management, that are brought up here. And it's really interesting to see these. I'm not used to seeing large groups of horses like that, maybe five. And so for me, go up there and drive around this area, first you see this large group of these brown colored animals, the cattle, right? That's immediately what my brain goes to. No, those are horses. Then over here, there's another group of, here, there's another group of them. And it's really fascinating to go down there and see these horses. Get a little bit farther north. Now this is in Wabunsee County. This is where Wabunsee, West Branch of Potawatomi, Riley, Gary. This is where I do almost all of my photography. And again, this is the kind of view I'm looking for, where I can see a long ways, where you can see the depth of the foothills out through there. I love where you can see through draws, big dramatic skies. I just love the feeling of. That's probably one of my favorite photos of the Flint Hills. I had to sneak in a picture of snow just to go from this to this, because that's what Canvas has been doing to us lately, right? So I had to sneak that in there. This is north of Manhattan, one of my favorite spots to go photograph. There's another view down through a draw. This is that weird area where I'm standing in Wabunsee County, I think photographing Riley and Gary County, looking out through there. But again, this is the kind of view I really like, where you can see a long ways late in the evening when you've got the great shadows laying across there to show the topography of the landscape. And I mentioned almost all of my photography from roads, just wandering roads. I love to go drive roads. I have some of my favorite roads. This is Old K18. That is a great road to drive. Take Deep Creek Road out of Manhattan. Deep Creek hits Old K18. You can turn, go east into Alma. Beautiful, beautiful views of the Flint Hills. Once you get into Alma, you go south out of Alma and get on the Skyline Scenic Drive. And that will take you back to I-70. It dumps you out on I-70 near the Prairie View Winery, just saying. So I'm happy to be headed back into Manhattan one day on the road. And this is a little bit like the Lone Tree. I really like to photograph roads, and I have a hard time passing up that view of road disappearing over the hill on the horizon there. But it's been cloudy all day. I was with my brother or my sister and her husband, and it's kind of a dreary day. And just as we got here, the clouds started to break up, and that light came through, lit that landscape up, and it was really neat. Of course, I was like, I had to slam on my brakes. I got to get out, photograph this, but to hear my sister and her husband, wow, look at that. It's a pretty magic moment. That's one thing I like about photography, is catching those moments like that. And this is another view on the western edge of Pot County that I photograph a lot. Again, you can see way back through the horizon. That's Carnegie Cove at Tuttle Creek Lake. And I do a lot of my photography going back to the same locations over and over and over again. And I like that. I find it comforting, but some people, don't you get bored? But you go back to the same location in a different moment, it's a different experience, right? Different plants, different light, a little bit different view. So to me, it's not the same. Yeah, maybe physically the same, but it's not the same moment. It's not the same experience. And I think that's what really keeps me going out, are those moments or that experience to get out there and see the beauty of our state. This is also in that same area. And so most of my photography is done with a wide angle lens. The prairie fits that big wide view, right? I am trying to do more, not get so stuck in a rut. This is actually a telephoto shot of the Flint Hills. And this is where working with Keith has been really interesting in that book and thinking about geology. So when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing lines and shapes and textures and color. But after reading about some of this, these shapes are here for a reason. Where it's flat here, there's probably a layer of really erosion resistant limestone. And that's why it's still flat, because it's not as easily eroded as out here on the edges. And Keith talks about that in the book. Then water will move differently. It'll hit and run over through here, down here. And that's why we get trees down in some of the draws, because the water's different, soil's different. And so you can see a line of rocks right through there too that hasn't been eroded yet. And so starting to think a little bit more is helping me slow down a little bit. Sometimes people, I can say this and I won't get kicked by my wife, She's not here with me today, but usually we're together. And a lot of times people say, it must be so peaceful when you're out taking pictures. When I do that, she'll get a huge smile on her face. Sometimes I'm pretty relaxed and I'm pretty peaceful. But sometimes like, I gotta get this right. I gotta get this. This light's changing, so I'm gonna miss it, right? I'm gonna miss it. And I actually might get the photo, but I missed the moment. Because I'm too focused on the camera. And that's where I was saying earlier, this landscape has been being shaped for hundreds of thousands of years, and then I worry about 30 seconds of light changing. So starting to think a little bit like that's helping me slow down a little bit sometimes and connect with the landscape better. There are some waterfalls in the Flint Hills. This is Pillsbury Crossing right outside of Manhattan. This is another area that was really important to me when I first started. This is where I learned how to set my camera myself. And the first time I went out and fiddled with my camera, shooting slide film and intentionally set the camera to give me a slow shutter speed, and that's why the water looks blurred. So I went out and I read how to do this. I go out and I do it, and I take my film in and drop it off. I wait a week, get it back, and wow, I did what I wanted. That's when I was like, okay, I think I can do this. I think back on that now, I think, man, I cannot wait to see what the result is. Wow. This is a waterfall at the Chase County Lake. There is 3 waterfalls there, really beautiful area. And again, you can see the layering through there, geological history. And this is the waterfall at the Geary County Lake. This is our biggest waterfall. It's about 40 feet. So pretty good sized waterfall. And this is one of the photos that ended up in the book. Keith wanted this photo in there because of these lines through there. So that's, showing the geological history. For me, I thought this was really interesting because from a photography standpoint, this was all about time. So I wanted that water to get that silky look to it. And you do that by setting a slow shutter speed. So maybe 2 seconds or something like that. And camera's on a tripod. And while that shutter's open, that water's moving. So it's actually blurry. Right? That's how you get that silky look. So for me, it's about time. But for Keith, this was also about real time, right? Geological time through there. And I asked Keith if he knew how many years that was. He said, can't really tell that. But that's, pretty fascinating to look back, going back in time there. I just found that interesting that I was worried about time, photographing time. And Keith really loved this because it actually kind of in a way is literally a photograph. And I just want to end here. And as for that flattest king,
Amen.
Kansas is not the flattest.
That's right.
Country, we are number 7. Florida is the number 1. Florida can just, they can take that, right? Illinois, North Dakota, Louisiana, Minnesota, Delaware, all flatter than Kansas. And according to the geologists cited in this article down here, I think it was a geologist from KU. So if you expand pancake out of the size of the state, even Colorado, flatter than that pancake. So remember that next time there's someone tells you that. So with that, I'll say thank you. Your dogs have been a huge part of my photography journey. I almost always have a dog with me. This is our latest dog, Finnegan, out enjoying the sunset. Thank you very much.
We have some time for Q&A, and then I wanted to say thank you to Faith and Life for being here selling books. I'm sure Scott would be happy to sign a copy for you. I just want to note they're going to lock the front door at 8. So if you, as you're leaving, just to the left of the front door, there's a door out onto the patio that you can go out through, and then over to the parking lot. Just a little logistical note. So anybody want to start us off with a question for Scott? Sure, John. Yeah.
Lots of ultra wide angle zooms, it looks like 16 to 35, something like that, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I go to. Working on getting a 14 to 35.
Oh, all right, Handyman.
Attention library. It's 7:55 and we close in 5 minutes.
Go ahead.
Please gather your items.
Yeah,
Your final and go the exit.
you spend a lot of time out there and you mentioned there is rattlesnake. You're in their habitat and just give a general, so you've learned a little how, to, incorporate your experience along with these rattlesnakes. Do you have any, good information again? Someone that doesn't really have any information?
I have never seen I've only seen a rattlesnake one time in a while.
Good.
And that was clear out near Lane County. I've seen a few dead ones, but only one time have I seen a live one.
Then that takes care of our problem.
Most of the time, you know, I'm on the road. I do go down in the ditch. I kind of try to pay attention. I do wear boots.
They have a tendency to hide.
Yeah,
I'm not interested in you unless they have to be.
I'm a little more worried about copperheads when I'm back on trails, especially with the dog. Especially now it's starting to warm up and they might be, I have seen copperheads at waterfalls one time. I am a little nervous around waterfalls because of snakes and poison ivy. I am extremely sensitive to poison ivy. I will get poison ivy now just because we're finding it. But yeah, rattlesnakes, I've never come across except one time. I'll probably see one next week.
Copperheads are the least venomous snake and the least worried. Even if you encounter them. The snake in, around Canopolis is western time.
Western. I knew I was gonna get that wrong.
Timber ratters wouldn't be anywhere close.
Least venomous doesn't make me feel better.
But people get bit by copperheads and don't seek medical attention, really do very well,
Usually,
usually.
okay, like that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of try to keep an eye out if I'm in a stinky area, especially where I want to see a copperhead, but, yeah, I've never come across one rattlesnake out in the foothills.
I see, in every one of your photos, the clarity of sharpness from the beginning to way out there. And would you be willing to give a tip, even though you have different situations photographed, but keep it sharp from here to there?
Yeah, so the easy thing to do is.
Oh,
Well,
I'm sorry, let me get it back.
that's all right. We can use Finnegan here.
That should work.
So you want to set a high f-stop, f16,
Yes,
and then focus a third of the way into the scene.
a third of the way.
To the horizon, not counting the sky. So from the horizon back to you, you would want to focus about a third of the way in, and that maximizes your depth of field or what your apparent sharpness in the photo. Now, if you really want to get technical, there's something called the hyperfocal distance, which you can look up on apps now or make a chart, and it will tell you at 16 millimeters, you focus at 3 feet. And so you would put your lens, say, in a manual focus. A lot of them have a distance scale. So you would set it to 3 feet, and that means anything from 1.5 feet out to infinity should appear sharp. And so.
What was that big word you used?
Hyperfocal distance.
Okay,
Yeah, a lot of them will have that on them, and if your lens have a scale, you just gotta get good at knowing what's 3 feet out front of you. But I know for a 16 millimeter lens at f16, it's 3 feet. I do that a lot. So I will just put that 3 feet and then make sure your closest object is farther than 1.5 feet from the back of the camera, not the front of the lens. It's from the plane of the sensor. And so a lot of times with the wide angle lenses, they push everything away from you and make everything small. So when you see a big flower in the foreground, I'm really, really close to that flower. So that the wide angle lens, then when you get close to something, it kind of exaggerates the size of it. And that helps with that sense of distance. So you just want to make sure you keep that flower, 1.5, 2 feet away from you.
1.5 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't use any speech therapy.
I don't do a lot. I'm starting to experiment with that a little bit so I can get really, really close to something. This is where you would shoot your image focused at different places. So you might save 5 or 6 photos and you change the focus. You might focus here, 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 here. And then you stack that together in software like Photoshop will take the sharpest parts of the image. Most of the time I don't need to do that, shooting the big, but it's something I kind of would like to experiment with.
You said 16 millimeter, you shooting full frame.
Yeah.
since you're giving tips, I really like the distinctive way your clouds look. How do I get mine to look that way?
You know, I think clouds make the photos, especially in this part of the state, so I spend a lot of time watching the weather. And when's it gonna be cloudy? And a lot of people say, oh, did you go outside? It's such a beautiful, clear sky. No, I want those clouds, and then you just need the light, a lot of it, you know, getting the kind of being maybe side lit, so the clouds get sculpted a little bit with the light. And side lighting really helps. A lot of times I shoot into the sun, but when you do that, you lose some detail because you don't have shadows falling across everything. So I think that probably helps some too. A polarizing filter can help. If you're 90 degrees from the sun, use a polarizing filter. I don't do that. Because on a wide angle lens, you get uneven effect across the frame. Because you see so much sky. I don't do a lot of that. So I think just waiting for the conditions to be right, which I think that's something, you know, like the photos I show here are a tiny fraction of the photos I take, right? So where the sky came out flat or something like that, those don't ever make it to the light of day. Right, so I think my library of photos has almost 80,000 photos in it now, and I maybe have shown people 1,000 of those, if that many. So I think a lot of it's just waiting for those conditions.
You have a favorite time of day?
Evening, just because I'm not a big morning person. So if you see something like that, you guess that evening or morning, guess evening for me. So around that golden hour, an hour, getting close to sunset to sunset, maybe just a little after sunset. So.
Just to give us an idea, how far are you from Finnegan in that picture?
So this was actually snapped with the cell phone. So that leash is about 6 feet. And so I'm standing there to snap that with my cell phone. And so cell phones, the smaller the sensor on your camera, the more depth of field you get. So cell phone cameras have a lot of depth of field because of that small sensor. I did, when I go switch to get my real camera out, and Finnegan said, no, I said enough that he's less than a year old. His patience is, I don't have enough treats.
Ready to go.
I have a question. Did Keith ask you to, or specifically to go to certain geological regions to fill in what he was wrong to write about the book?
We did a little bit, and that's when Mickey and Shannon were great to work with, and that's why Keith reached out to them to help fill in a lot of regions I didn't have. But I did go down to the very southeast corner of the state to Zimmerhorn Park, and I did go clear up into the northeast corner of the state a couple of times to get photos specifically for this.
You do a fair bit of gravel road driving, it looks like. What do you drive?
I started in a Zuzu rodeo and coming back one evening about 15 years ago, photographing the burns. I hit a bull that I never did see, going 60 miles an hour, and I should be dead. And that was a whole ordeal. And now I drive a Ford Escape. Gone through a fair number of sets of tires. Good tires are important.
Just gonna ask you to see any bulls lately.
No, I haven't really photographed spring burns since then, even the sour being the.
Kansas is a great fishing state. Do you still fish? And what's the biggest fish?
Oh, biggest fish, of course. State record striper, right? No, I haven't fished for a long time. When I was a grad student, I started. Well, I fished through high school with my parents, and I went to school with a family. I was kind of one of the last kids, so the family vacations kind of tapered off. I did a little bit of fly fishing still around Kansas, but then once I got the camera, I kind of gave up on that. Biggest fish I ever caught, maybe a 10-pound striper. So we used to fish at Wilson quite a bit. My cousin Jeff, if you ever see him, knows that I caught a 50-pound stripe.
Right.
Okay, well, let's give Scott another round of applause. One here, and I've got some Faith and Light. I've got the library's copy. First one to claim, you can check it out. We've also got the Faith and Light copies over for sale here. Thank you all again, and thank you as well those on Zoom and Facebook.
Yeah, if anybody would like to see some shark's teeth, feel free.